medieval siege weapons. Yes, those big wooden structures that were used to create mass destruction. Although these huge weapons looked cool and did a lot of damage, they were not used much because they were, well, huge. Back then they couldn't just build a big hunk of engineering at home and bring it to a castle halfway across Europe like we could today. They would usually transport the materials or find materials at the location and build on site. I mean, just imagine hanging out in your castle and hearing a bunch of people outside just start building a big old weapon out in front. Now with that out of the way, let's go to what you actually came here for. Your ballistas, your trebuchets, and your catapults. There are many types of siege weapons, but we'll just go over 5. Starting off with number 1, let's start with a game of
Who's that Pokemon?
It's Pikachu.
It's
It's a ballista. Basically, the ancient Greeks took their famous crossbow and said, bigger. So, they made it bigger. They took a big wooden rail with a couple of sticks connected with torsion springs. Torsion springs were two pieces of skeins twisted together to create directional tension. The 2 sticks were connected to a wooden dowel in the rail, and the dowel was connected to a crank at the bottom of the rail. When the crank was spun, it pulled down the dowel, creating tension. Various objects were put into the earlier designs, such as rocks or heavy darts. When released, the object shot off the rail and launched towards the enemy's castle. The second will have to be the trebuchet. There are many types of trebuchets, but most remarkable of the few was the Warwolf, a gargantuan trebuchet that stood about 6 stories tall and was used by King Edward I to conquer one Stirling Castle in 1300 AD. But the one that was used the most in medieval times was the counterweight trebuchet. This trebuchet was used by both Christians and Muslims. The trebuchet consisted of one long wooden arm that was connected to a large wooden structure with a fulcrum point further from the projectile. There was a rope on one side of the arm that was used to send a rock or something of the sort flying. And on the other side was a counterweight, hence the name counterweight trebuchet. The arm was pulled down to load a projectile into the device, and released to shoot the rock at an unsuspecting castle. The third has to be the catapult. The catapult was similar to a trebuchet, but instead of using gravity, it used various types of stored potential energy. The catapult was made of an arm connected to a sturdy base. The arm had a bucket on the other end that was used to hold the payload. And there were a few types of catapults that used various types of energies, but some of the notable ones was springs, bows, twisted rope, elastics, or numerous other materials and mechanisms. Catapults were usually manually tensioned and held with a restraining rope. No, not a restraining order, a restraining rope. A rope that held the bucket with a tension on it. When the bucket and arm was released, it flung the rock toward a castle. Fourth will be the good old belfry, or more commonly known as a siege tower. Siege towers were huge towers that stood roughly equal or higher than castle walls. They were often rectangular shape, with 4 wheels to allow it to roll up to the castle. Towers allowed archers to fire into the castle's fortresses and allowed troops to scale the walls in protected bliss. And last but not least, a battering ram. These siege weapons were simple but effective. Essentially, a battering ram was a big log hung up with rope on a big frame. They were used to bash open gates of castles to invade and conquer. And they did it with ease because the old materials like stone and wood were weak to tension. Okay, roll credits.